Welcome to another episode on IR-ideate. I'm Mayurika, co-founder of IR-ideate, and with me here is Mr. Karthik Venkatachalam, founder of IR-ideate. Today, we're thrilled to bring in Ronnie all the way from Lebanon. So let's welcome him. Hi, Ronnie.
Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
So give me a quick introduction on your background, on what you do.
Currently I'm an AI developer and working in Madrid in Spain in the advertising industry. But in my free time and in my previous academic life, I was an international relations and economic specialist with a focus in Middle East. Also, by nature of being Lebanese, it comes with the package to be involved in the political scene of the Middle East because it affects my experience of life, of travel, of immigration status, so on and so forth. So I I would say I'm heavily involved in the ongoing political situation. I also write articles on my LinkedIn. I have a blog. I also had a podcast at one point, and yeah, I'm passionate about finding a sustainable way forward for all the countries in the Middle East.
That is great. Let's pass it over to Mr. Karthik.
So, hi Ronnie, hi Mayurika. So good to have all of you here. Ronnie, we just discussed how to go about this particular podcast, right, on the Middle East. And my intention was that we don't get drawn into just the conflict that's happening, which is primarily between Israel and the Arab nations. But we look at some solutions, and I think this is what you also kind of expressed in terms of there's no path to a solution unless we actually try to ideate about what could be a peaceful Middle East. And so let's start with do you think there's any role model Arab state that that can be emulated by most of the Arab nations, if not all?
If we look at if we look at it if we look at all the countries in totality, no, because the ones that are doing well usually have sacrificed in other areas with respect to their autonomy and their sovereignty, politically and militarily speaking, sometimes economically as well. Take a look at the Gulf states, for example. They have a high quality of life, business is going well, their economic they're becoming economic centers of investment, technology, and startups, and that's great. But it comes at the cost of losing autonomy and sovereignty because you depend on the Western world for all these things to flourish in your country. So you gave up as a nation your resources, so to speak. Now, other countries can't do that because they don't have the same level of natural resource wealth. For example, let's take Lebanon. Lebanon doesn't produce anything, doesn't export anything, and nothing of significance, nor do we have any significant industry. So it would be more difficult to replicate that model, actually almost impossible. But to answer your question, I don't think there are any role models that have done it according to my perspective the right way without sacrificing any autonomy or sovereignty.
Yes, thanks, Ronnie. No, I totally understand your point about sovereignty and autonomy, right? And but at the same time, I mean, I think in terms of opening up the economy to not just the Western world, but like the Gulf countries have done, there's a lot of migrant labor there, including from India. And also I think in some respect, I mean, it's a touchy issue to kind of delve into, but the whole political umbrella, if you will, in the Middle East, um, is because it's not just religious, right? It's also political. And if I remember from our conversations earlier, you mentioned that in Lebanon, you're a Lebanese Christian, right? So there is no equality in the sense that you can hold the topmost position in your country just because of your religion. So there's like the Sunni divide, the Shia divide, and Christian Arabs are really a minuscule minority, I would feel. So is there? I mean, I totally understand, including that, the Gulf states, apart from having the peace and prosperity, they also have the vices of, like excesses and also maybe their client states of the West, etc. But is there a middle ground that's possible where you can, I wouldn't say relinquish your sovereignty, but, become just more open and if you look at Saudi Arabia now, I mean, even though I talked about political Islam, it's kind of asserting its autonomy. So, is there a middle ground in that sense? So, are there bits and pieces that we can pick up from different countries and create, like maybe a role model for Lebanon, where you're from?
Well, first of all, I'd like to clear up a slight misconception. I think you mentioned that Christian Arabs are a minority. Well, in relative terms, sure, but take Lebanon, for example, there are 18 officially recognized religions or sects, from Kurds to Armenians to Christians, and different sects of Christians. For example, the president, and this comes from French colonialism, the Lebanese president must always be a Maronite Christian, which I am not. I think, I mean, I'm an atheist, but I think my family comes from an Orthodox Christian background. So that's why I would not qualify. So even within the sects, now the reason we have this painting of the religious divide is because it helps the narrative of divide and conquer, so to speak. I mean, opening up the economy is fine, and opening up trade and other modalities of doing business with the rest of the world is perfectly fine, and it's highly encourageable. But the problem comes when you lose control over the kinds of decisions you can make. So when you, as Saudi Arabia, have extreme wealth from your natural the natural resources that you have in your country, and you make deals with the Americans, as it was in the 70s and 60s. Now, when there's an agenda in Yemen, they must be involved, because the amount of military bases that the Americans have over there involves de facto the Saudi government. Now, it's not black and white. So there were several conflicts, especially between OPEC and America across the years, with the factions deciding to um, make oil embargoes against the West, and so on and so forth. So it's not black and white, but deep down that if you cross the line, there will be repercussions for your entire country. So you depend on that. Now, part of the problem, and I write about this a lot, the biggest part of the problem, I think, is that the Middle East is a place that hasn't been left alone to develop by itself. Because either it's natural resources, or it's drugs, or it's weapons, or it's a playground for proxy wars. So you don't have the chance, as a small country like Lebanon. Our leaders are utterly useless. I mean, they affect no change over the situation in the country. Iran has more control in Lebanon in terms of deciding the fate and the direction that the country takes. Take a look at the crisis right now on the border in southern Lebanon. The situation is escalating at a drastic pace, and who is deciding? It's not the Lebanese government. It's Hezbollah, which is a plaything of Iran, taking the decision ultimately whether Lebanon enters war with Israel or not. And here within lies the problem. I mean, us, the people, cannot decide our own fate, which I partly, in my own writings, I partly and justifiably so have to blame the external factors, but there are also internal factors at play. I mean, us as an Arab people, we've allowed ourselves to be divided in such a way. So we've eaten up the narrative that no, Sunni and Shia are in conflict over territory and because before we used to be neighbors. Now there's tension between these neighbors where we still live in the same area. So it becomes more difficult when you have to factor in that we cannot take our own, we cannot make our own choices freely, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Ronnie. I mean, I understand, the point on Western interference, Western intervention, right? And to a large scale, it's been extremely, extremely cruel in some sense and unjustifiable in the Middle East. Some of the interventions and some of the ruses that the West has played, like the weapons of mass destruction, or to me, actually, more than that, and I think I had told you this earlier also, is the way that they went into Libya, and without much of media coverage, we hardly got 2 or 3 days of news. The country was in disarray after 2 or 3 days of France and US led NATO bombing of the whole country. But I'm saying, is there also like an inherent issue with the the society as such? And if, I mean, of course, we said let's keep the conflict out of our discussion, at least when we start our conversation. But I mean, do you think Israel has a point when it says that, coming to the current conflict that's happening between Israel and Gaza, that in order to ensure that it exists as an entity, there is no other way, because they're infidels, right? I mean, do you think that notion is a creation of the outside world, or is that really some kind of a deep-rooted sentiment among a large section of the population?
Well, it's complicated because Palestinian Jews exist and have always existed, and Jews have always lived in the land. So now that you have a narrative being forced down your throat from the Arab side, of course, as we can't expect the intellectual civil society of the Palestinians to be able to thrive. In fact, it's being and has been manipulated just as much as there is military involvement. There's also propaganda. So, I mean, Israel is the one that financed Hamas in the first place in the 70s because they perceived that communism or pan-Arab nationalism was way more dangerous because it reached a wider variety and united a a more diverse section of the population. So they had greater numbers and a greater following. So they perceived that to be more dangerous. Now, the problem is that even in Israel, there are a section of Palestinian Jews that they treat with disrespect over there. So Israel is a state that exists, and that's not going to change. Israel is recognized by almost every country on earth to exist. They have their right to defend themselves. The attack that happened shouldn't have, or strategically, even if someone would support such an attack, strategically it was a blunder, because now look at what's happening now. I mean, now there's the last 25 years building with construction projects in Gaza to build these buildings that people are living in is all gone to waste. And the people that are suffering are the Palestinians. Strategically was a blunder. But the idea that the response is proportional and non-discriminatory discriminatory is where the line gets very blurry, because you can defend yourself. You are a country that's recognized. I mean, if we undo all of colonialism, the Middle East as it is today wouldn't even look 1% similar of what it does today. All the borders have been fabricated, and in the last 100 years. So we can't undo that. We are where we are. Israel exists, fine. But you have to follow you don't get special treatment. You can't not abide by international law, and specifically conventions on war crimes. I mean, you can't disregard that and get special status under any circumstances. I mean, and we've seen how much has been fabricated so that they can do that. I mean, the most recent example is that now the International Court of Justice ruled in favor of South Africa, recognizing that Israel is technically an apartheid state. And what's the thing that gets the most media coverage? It's now that they published some dossier that the UNWRA, which is a relief agency for Palestinians, has links to Hamas and is financing terrorism or helping terrorism. It's like, okay, well, we can't function. And this is a problem that reverberates throughout the Middle East, because we can't function when we don't have information. In Lebanon, we don't know the population size. We don't know how many refugees there are. We don't have data because there is no government and there is no entity, and we even refuse to conduct the census of the population because it would distort and challenge the constitution, right, that exists, that says that the president must be Christian, the speaker of the parliament must be Shia, et cetera, et cetera. So we refuse to even get this kind of information. So how can we operate as an outsider looking at conflicts like this? Everything you see is a half truth, because there really is no information. Everything is done behind closed doors and under the table. And this is where the essence of the problem lies. Like, if you want to take a logical, pragmatic approach to improving the situation, we need data. We need accurate data and reliable and trusted entities that are measuring this data, so that we can look at what exists today, and then we can decide how we can move forward.
Yeah, makes sense. So can you again clarify, in Lebanon, what are the positions that can be held by the different sections? Like, what's the top most position in Lebanon? And can a Christian be that?
Yeah, like I told you, the president is always Maronite Christian, so a specific sect of Christianity. The speaker of the parliament, who has been the same person for the last 25 years, must be a Shia Muslim. And then there are the leader of the party must be a Sunni. There are other assignments, and this is all laid out in the constitution. and it's a relic of French colonialism because Lebanon was separated from Syria under the French, right?
So what's the highest position that a Sunni Muslim can hold in Lebanon? I thought that Sunni Muslims can have the highest position, or is Lebanon more a Shia-dominated country?
No, Lebanon is quite frankly relatively even, which makes the situation of the country even more difficult to untangle because the last census that was done, which was in 1942, was like 40% Christians of all denominations, so all the different sects. No, 20, sorry, around 20% Christians and 40 Sunni, 40 Shia. That's more or less the situation that we're looking at today. And it makes it difficult to find a way forward because how do you decide, given that the fact that religion plays an important role, which there are other reasons for, how do you decide the way forward? Because if the 40% are 1 million people, they have to take over another 1 million people. It doesn't, and in the end of the day, we're all neighbors. We all live together. We all have the same problems. So all of us are suffering from lack of basic necessities like electricity and clean water. So the fact that it's sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy because you have the idea of your sect and your religion that you as a Lebanese citizen should be aligned with the leader of your sect, the party that they represent, hurts you because you get no benefits. It does nothing for you. You still have the same problems as anybody else from any other sect, but you're only reinforcing the system by doing that. It's hard because you don't really. I feel that it's only fair to empathize with the average person because it's hard to visualize a different future when you're in that situation, especially that you as the average Lebanese citizen can't create a party and just a political party and run for office. It doesn't work like that.
I understand.
Legally, and also they won't let you. So.
Can you say that again? Sorry.
Legally speaking, there are restrictions as to can create a party. Also defined in the constitution, and also the powers that be won't necessarily let you.
Right.
You have no chance. So they.
So I mean, I remember you were telling me about your earlier project on humor, right? Which was European and Middle Eastern relations, I guess, if that's
correct.
And in that you were mentioning that the issue with the Arab nations, I mean, not all of them, but most of the Arab nations, is that the citizenry doesn't have a voice, which is what I think you kind of expressed again, and it's just a bunch of ruling elites, and maybe the strings are being pulled from outside with cash and dollars and all that. So they're actually making the decisions for a large number of people, and people don't have a say in how the countries should be run, right? And of course, Lebanon is a democracy, right? Because they have elections. I mean, if I dumb it down to holding elections, whereas we have Jordan, which is bordering Lebanon, it's a monarchy, and there's Saudi Arabia, which is a monarchy. I mean, different kinds of government. So do you think that's one point? And, coming from India, of course, you will find a lot of supporters for Israel in India, given the historical background, because of the conquests that happened on the Indian subcontinent and things like that. So even me personally, I would think, if religion is kind of the central piece for the human identity, then why can't the division of land happen in such a way that Palestinian Arabs can be absorbed in other Islamic nations? I know it might sound a little bit, even by the UN conventions or some of the UN mandates, that might sound like a little bit of an extreme view, because I think UN says that actually displacement of populations against their wishes is like a horrible thing. But where I'm coming from is like it looks like once the population of a country becomes like sizably Islamic, the whole country becomes Islamicized. And even though a lot of times we hear this, we hear a justification, and I think it's the right justification, that it's a minority of the people who have these extreme views. It seems that the majority is okay because they are, they're, as long as they're not feeling the oppression, they're fine, right? It's only the other religious sects that feel the pain. So I'm talking about jizya, for example, right, which is like imposed in some of the countries where Islam is the constitution, right? And then there's also this. Particularly, I have misgivings about a couple of the tenets, which is blasphemy and apostasy. So I think apostasy more so because it kind of robs a citizen from believing in what they want to believe. Like you mentioned you're an atheist, but you're not living in Lebanon. And I don't know how freedom of, expressing your faith and, in that respect, is that something that's holding back a lot of the Arab nations? And is that something that's holding back peace from happening between Arabs and Jews? And you spoke about the October 7th attack by Hamas, and yeah, I understand that Israel kind of created Hamas because they wanted a counterbalance to Hezbollah, right? Or that's what I understand from that part of the world. But also, after having kind of nourished, quote unquote, Hamas to an extent, and also in some sense developed Gaza, economically at least, right? An attack like October 7th kind of, breaks all kind of trust. And of course, there's a lot of discussion and conversation around anti-Semitism. But there's also, coming from India, there's also a lot of history that's kind of brushed under the carpet, because now we are like we've got divided into different countries. The Hindu majority India, which still gets a lot of flack for being quote unquote Hindu nationalist. But the same thing does not apply to an Islamic country like Pakistan, or now even to Bangladesh. So once you're Islamic country, then it's fair game to kind of think that we're going to be 100% Islamic. We're going to have different rights for different religions. And is that something that needs to be looked at internally? I mean, I understand there's politics both ways, but what do you think? Because sorry for going on the long rant, but I remember when we were in class, taking the course on Middle East, right? And I think there was a question about what about places like in Pakistan and Afghanistan, which are now Islamic, right? But there was a pre-Islamic past, and there were genocides that happened. In fact, if you look at the Hindu Kush mountain range, Hindu Kush actually means Hindu killer. Okay, so it was actually recorded as history that during one of these invasions, a lot of the Hindus, by that I don't really mean a religious denomination, because at that time, everyone who was Indian was just Hindus. And Hindu is actually um, I think it's called an exonym. So a name that was given to us by the Persians and, some of the people who were not Indians. We didn't call ourselves Hindus at that time. But all of this is now not part of the history at all. But a lot of the victimization of Islam comes up again and again. And, a lot of the suppression of Hindu nationalism happened. I mean, as of now, it's called resurgence, extremism, etc. But I think that is one of the reasons that I would say that there's support for Israel from India, a large population of Indians. And also, if you looked at the Israeli ambassador to the UN, he mentioned this about, how can Israel exist knowing that the capability of an October 7th kind of an attack exists from its neighbors, from the borders, from within its borders, and it's an existential threat because now Hamas has in fact proved that it's possible to attack Israel and carry out a large-scale attack. So the earlier facade of the Iron Dome and having this impregnable defense has collapsed in Israel. So, I mean, I think that was Hamas's strategic goal as well. But now, how can we expect Israel to stop to ensure that another attack like that does not happen? And a ceasefire would allow Hamas to rearm and carry out another major large-scale attack, which might wipe out Israel.
Yeah, so I'm not sure I agree with how you describe the aftermath of the October 7th attacks, because the Iron Dome defense and the idea that that was an existential threat is just not the case, because as we can see, the rockets from Hamas and from Hezbollah from Lebanon aren't doing as much as those groups would like them to do, which means that essentially from the air, Israel is untouchable. Now, why did October 7 work the way it did? Because if you look at the geography, I mean, it's just 5 kilometers. For 5 kilometers distance, you take some jeeps and you go and you drive in on a holiday, on a Jewish holiday, and no one's paying attention. You get in, you take some hostages, you do whatever you want to do, and then it's that simple. So the idea is that the picture still has to be portrayed as a military power against insurgents with little to no equipment or support, right? It's like the equipment that they do have, to be completely frank, I mean, Gaza is completely controlled. Yes, there is a tunnel system, and yes, there are ways to smuggle in contraband equipment, weapons, but not to the extent that Israel had no idea about it. I mean, these soldiers went to Iran to train. Who lets them leave Gaza? It's Israel. I mean, they need an enemy. They need an enemy that is worthy. I'm not saying that the attack was an inside job or that they let it happen or anything like that. But from the perspective of Israel, it's beneficial to have enemies that are capable of doing something. And this is the same as in Lebanon with Hezbollah. They could have been completely annihilated years ago. But why? I mean, they need them to be there. If you destroy the reason, if your business is war and you destroy your enemy, you're out of business. You have no reason to exist anymore. Hezbollah only exists and Hamas only exists with one mission. We defeat the occupiers. If the occupiers aren't occupying anymore, you're also going to vanish. You're not needed anymore. So just like any corporation or any entity has an instinct not to self-destruct, to continue their existence, they'll keep doing that. So it's important to frame the conflict as a military power against I wouldn't call Hamas an insurgency militia, but they are an armed militia, and they are one that's financed by Iran.
Okay. No, I mean, the only reason I mentioned that or characterized that the way I did was I've also heard a lot of commentators from either side actually mention that October 7th is like a watershed moment.
So let's just wrap it up for here. Okay.
Yeah.
But before we go, could you just give me a like a summarized version of the podcast for the viewers? We were talking about religion and what if Israel doing is ethically right or wrong, and we covered a lot of parts during the entire podcast, right? So just like give a quick end line to it.
Sure. Whenever we talk about the Middle East, there are several roads that are generally followed. So you have people trying to agree on the history and the facts of history, especially in the case of Israel Palestine, but in the region as a whole. You have the cultural / religious aspect of the societies of different countries within the Middle East, and then you have the more macro global perspective that can be discussed, and that's the West and the governments and the regional wars, proxy wars, all of that stuff. So when we talk about the Middle East, it's important instead of going down only one of those roads, but rather to combine them all to have a more holistic perspective, because we can talk about the effect of having so many different religions within a society, but it means nothing, and it gives us even worse of a perspective than if we were to combine it with the policies of the government and the pressures that come from external players. So, because you have dogmas and propaganda that's being manipulated in order to tailor-made for each region to support one group in the conflict or another, to take sides. So it's important to combine the different levels of analysis. If we talk about only one, if we talk about only history, we go nowhere. We just either agree or fail to agree on what happened until now. If we talk only about religion and cultural issues, we don't get the holistic perspective of why the society is functioning or behaving that way. And if we only look at the macro level, then we won't understand the people and the desires and the wishes and the struggles of the people living in their day-to-day lives. So it's important to combine all of those things, and then we can have a proper understanding of what it's like to be a citizen of the Middle East, what they would like their region to look like, and what they expect of their governments, and so on and so forth.
Right. Great. That was beautifully put. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you.